Okay, Michael Frazier, thanks so much for joining me on Life Before the Virus.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
And I'm wearing my Mike Bloomberg t-shirt because that's how we met on the Mike Bloomberg campaign where you were a national spokesperson.
I didn't get the memo that you were wearing some Mike swag. I would have brought my swag too, but I'm glad to see you in it.
And now you're back at your regular job since the campaign ended in March at the 9/11 Museum, which is slated to open this weekend.
Yeah, so right before I left for the campaign, I was doing external affairs at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. It was doing great, still doing great, and spent some time as a national spokesman for Bloomberg. When I left Mike's campaign, it was right at the end there at March 13th, as we both know, probably the impetus for your show. Coronavirus was starting to take hold of the city and the country, and we closed the Memorial Museum on March 13th. And it has been an interesting time for our institution and all of us that works there. It's been something else, but we do have some pretty good news. We just recently announced we're gonna reopen the memorial on July 4th, Independence Day, perfect time for it to inspire the country. But that first day is going to be exclusively for first responders, the not larger 9/11 community, family members, and also frontline workers for COVID pandemic. And then the following day, on July 5th, that's a Sunday, we're opening up to the general public between 1 and 8 daily.
And now there was a lot of planning that went into figuring this out because as a destination for tourism and a hub in New York City with such history, I'm sure the last couple of months were really crazy trying to figure out when you can open and how it's going to work with social distancing. So tell us about that.
It's funny, I was having this conversation the other day about how do you open and operate a space, with the pandemic. Like everyone else, we had to learn a lot. It's going to be safe. We have a lot of things that we're going to be able to do that we have to do. So there'll be what you would think we're going to require face masks. There'll be hand sanitizing stations. We'll be able to sanitize and clean the entire facility so everyone will be safe. We're going to recognize social distancing. There'll be one way you can come and one way you can exit. So we thought about everything using CDC guidelines, experts who are helping us to make sure we stay safe. But as you mentioned, it's a mass destination. So we don't feel like the same number of people are gonna come. When we reopen, annually we did about 6 million people per year at the memorial. And before, it's great that the memorial is open. It's gonna be safe and healthy for everyone. The museum itself is going to remain closed. And that was our economic driver. It produced the revenue to operate and run the memorial and the museum. So to operate the memorial publicly, we're going to need donations more than ever. So we're hoping people will pitch in. And I have to, since we already was talking about Mike, I have to say he's our chairman at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. He's been an incredible leader. And it was his idea to open up the memorial on July 4th. To inspire our city, which went through a tough time with the virus, and the country. But I was talking to a friend about this, saying, all the safety standards are new to us. Like we had to figure it out like any other cultural institution. Museums are actually pretty good about keeping people away from stuff when you think about it.
Right.
You're not supposed to be touching things. They're good at like crowd control, time ticketing. But the virus is just something that's different. It's a different kind of threat. But we are ready, we're prepared, and people can visit us safely. After we closed and then having to reopen reminded me of when the memorial first opened. A lot of people forget about this, but we opened up on the 10-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And at that time, the World Trade Center, a 16-acre site, was still under construction. There was all these projects around us that were still being built. There was no One World Trade completed. There was no Towers 2, 3, and 4, no path. So we actually had to open memorial before those projects were complete, before the museum was even complete. And so we already knew operationally how to do something that was difficult. We knew how we can get people in safely. We had a time ticketing system. So we already had a little practice. I'm not trying to say at all that, the coronavirus has not presented some challenges, but I am confident and certain, particularly under the leadership of our president, Alice Greenwald. She's been thinking about this a long time. She assembled a great team. I'm included in the executive management team to figure out exactly how we can do it. And a few days from now, we'll be open. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Now, does that mean other attractions around the city will be able to open as well?
We've been following, so that I think we're an interesting institution because we have an outside memorial that's 8 acres, and we have a museum that's 110,000 square feet. It's a museum space, and we're following the protocols of the state. So that's phase 4 when you think about cultural spaces or entertainment that's inside. And everyone, I think, is trying to weigh how many people can, in 2019, we had all these people and we made, on admissions, we made all this revenue. I think that's a silly way to approach it. Given that we have to do social distancing, it's not about how many people that you had in 2019. It's not about how many tickets you sold in 2019. This is a different time. So I think the first thing should just be about safety. Like, how many people can you bring through your space and recognize social distancing and making sure people can still experience your space and not feel concerned about their health or someone else's health when they leave your spot. So in terms of the museum, we are preparing plans to reopen. That is our intent. The memorial will be first and then the museum, but we're still working out exactly how we're gonna do that. We're gonna follow the state guidelines. You know what, Scott, what's the one thing that I think, what the World Trade Center site itself does for people, because there's so many, I just remember being here, I live in Brooklyn, as you know, and before I started working at the Memorial Museum, I was actually a reporter at City Hall covering the Bloomberg administration. And the World Trade Center was a mini beat of mine. And when those fences were up, I used to walk down, get coffee nearby, I think off Vesey Street. And I would see people, it was insane to me. I would see people from all over the world coming down, like peeking around the perimeter fences. It just has a natural draw. Like, people are gonna come to that space. Mm-hmm. And so I think we know that. And so because we understand the importance of that space, we understand that when people are there, they are important to us. So we're just gonna take every precaution we can, make sure people can come, reflect, and hopefully they'll be back when the museum eventually reopens too.
Right, so it's the memorial that's opening this weekend, the museum still TBD, following the state guidelines. So I wonder then, what is your perspective on, everyone's talking about South Dakota right now, where Mount Rushmore is and the fireworks are gonna go off. That's a national monument. And the governor there was on the news last night saying that it's gonna be open for fireworks and there's going to be no demand to wear a mask. You don't need to wear a mask, and they're not going to make people social distance.
This debate is just, you understand my politics because we've worked together on a campaign. So but outside of politics, outside about health choices or the freedom to choose, there's a word that we should all accept, and that's called science. So if there's any sheer amount of any type of evidence that is telling you that wearing a mask, social distancing will help decrease the risk of you catching COVID, I would say wear a fashionable mask and go to a fireworks display. Or if not, you're gonna go home and you'll carry the virus with you and get other people sick. I can't really think about other people's choices. I don't know what it's like to be a governor or a mayor. I feel like they have to make difficult choices all the time. And they have, particularly when I think about New York City, not just Cuomo, but Mayor de Blasio, you have 10 million people there. So you have to make choices for 10 million people. And it's always gonna be difficult. I'm not at the table, I don't understand it. So hopefully what they're doing, if you're gonna exhibit some kind of leadership, is that you at least look at the science. You at least look at what already worked. How did New York go from being one of the worst places in the country, the worst, with the density, the people travel all over the world, come to New York. How did it go from that to where it is today? Maybe mask has something to do with it. Maybe social distancing has something to do with it. Maybe quarantining had something to do with it. I would say check a box on all those three, and other people should follow suit. That's why we're starting to see this resurgence now in the country. What do you think?
Well, so, I mean, I think we rely on our government for certain things, and now the government has stepped in. Everyone's been giving their opinion, but I don't think this should be a partisan issue. I think what we're seeing is Republicans don't want you to have to wear a mask. They think you should have personal accountability, and Democrats say wear a mask, and that shouldn't be the case. And I have my master's in public health. This is a health crisis. It's a nonpartisan issue. And I feel the same way about what we're seeing in terms of race relations right now. This whole racial justice, social equity, Black Lives Matter is a nonpartisan issue. It shouldn't be Republicans versus Democrats.
You know what? You're right. The funny thing about, I'm glad you're bringing this up because I was thinking about this the other day, how something just feels different. I don't know why the country chose 2020 amidst a pandemic to become woke, but it seems like the entire country is now, accepting things that is part of our history, part of this country's terrible history that we all have to reconcile with and recognize. I was today having a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility in the workspace and how important it is. In that context, it just can't be about race. There's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're working with people, particularly a diverse population. But we can be laser focused on what's happening in our country right now and talk squarely about how race and systemic discrimination and bias is happening. Heartbreaking, to read some of the New York Times had an incredible look at, I think, 70 cases. They were all connected by the phrase "I can't breathe," and they examined all of them, and it was really tough to see, experience. I got to be on a personal level. For me, I've never really had a negative reaction or a confrontation with a police officer. I've been pulled over plenty, but I've never had, and what's so crazy about what's happening right now is I wonder why not, and why was I so lucky when it seems like these cases, not just with police, not just, but these cases just seem to be so not random, but almost sometimes targeted. So I always, not to just personally thinking, well, how did I get so lucky? Particularly I grew up in the South before coming to New York. And, I've always been active out there in the community, seeing people, being around people. So it just makes you think a lot about it. One thing I think that folks should try to do as they try to reconcile what's happening with this country is, before we take a stance, to your point about politics and what side to land on, before we take a stance of where it is, whether defund police, fund police, I don't want to get into that kind of debate because I think it takes away from the core problem. So before anyone gets into all that, I think we should just listen, do some reading, look at these cases, see what's happening, not just the ones that are recorded and remembered today, but look at some things that was forgotten in our history. So then you can have a wider view. You have more information to really understand what's happening. This wasn't just a flip of one case that tilted over everything. It's been happening for a while.
You know why I think this all happened right now is because of COVID. Everyone's home. A lot of people are not working, and there was time and energy for people to come out and start advocating and take it to the streets. And they have the time now to riot and to stand up for a cause.
I hear that. I do. And first, I'm grateful that people have the time to really think and respond accordingly. But that also angers me too as an excuse. I mean, just like, again, you and I have a little history. You join a campaign to do politics because, not just because you have free time. We don't do our communications work to shine light on something that's not good because we have free time. I wasn't a journalist writing about crime and politics just because I have free time. These things are interesting to me, and I have a civic responsibility to be active. So I appreciate people who, have a little time, they're seeing the research, they're really responding to it. But it also frustrates me a little bit because I'm saying, again, these are not issues that started with the pandemic. They've been a part of our country's institutions and our country ourselves for years, hundreds of years. So I just feel like it's great. I do not want to knock it because I'm telling you, I think it's great. But I also just question, I want people to sort of just think about or reflect on, why did I wait until now?
Mhm. So you have kids. What do you,
Oh,
oh,
get it
yeah.
on it. Sorry,
Oh,
sorry. I wasn't grabbing a kid. You thought I was grabbing a kid?
I'm like, let me grab.
Here he is right here. I have two, Sabian and Sinclair. Sinclair's about to be 2. Sabian's 7. She's probably on her book club call right now.
Okay, so she's 7. She understands a little bit of what's going on in the world, but what do you think of raising a family now in this world? And what do you tell your kids when there's conversations about racism? And granted, your kids are small, but for
Yeah.
anyone with that's raising children in this world.
Well, for Sabian, I think because her and, me and my wife she's also a former journalist. She used to be a AP bureau chief in New York. We both like politics. We both enjoy, involved in a lot of civic things. So she's around that a lot. And I'll tell you a funny story. Politics aside, it was 2016, and I was getting ready to go to work, and Sabian was crying. And I was like, man, what's going on? And, Hillary just lost. And so I'm trying to consult her. And I don't know what made me do it. I'll send you the recording after this. But I just pushed record on my phone, audio. And I'm talking to her. I was like, hey, what's going on? She's like, I thought she would win. She's crying through her. She's like sobbing through her tears, talking through her tears. I thought she would win. I was like, who? She said, I wanted Hillary to be the first white president. in her mind, at her age, all she knew in our country was a black president, right? So so how I treat her, separate than the little guy, he's about to be 2, is I understand that she's been impacted by things around her. She sees how we live our lives, what we digest, what we read, what we watch, and so what we talk about at the table, me and my wife, or recently in a car. So I straight up, I encourage her to ask questions. She actually made a Black Lives Matter sign that's hanging out right now. And she talked about, when we're watching the news, she's asking, I don't understand, why can't Black people just be left alone to live? Why can't we just be okay in this country? And I try to talk to her a little bit about that. It's difficult because I think for her, she goes to school in Brooklyn. I think for her, some kids may not experience the things that she will because of who she is in this country. And so we talk a little bit about that and just say it doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just that, unfortunately for you, sometimes there'll be something that will be judged or done to you purely based on your appearance, not your ability, not the kind of person you are. And so we just have honest conversations about it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the best way forward.
That's the only way to do it, I think. If you have someone, of course, it's an appropriate conversation because I'm understanding she's 7 years old and she still needs to have fun in this life. Mm-hmm. So we do that too.
2 parents that are involved in politics and news, I think it's appropriate, like you said, to have these conversations with a child who's beginning to understand everything that's going on around her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we double team it a lot, me and my wife, but it's all good. It's a good conversation to have. I'd rather talk about that because I'm not an expert in some of the activities that she wants to do anyway. So give me that job any day.
So thank you. I know you and I can go on and on forever talking about all kinds of things, but we look forward to the memorial opening up this weekend and TBD on the museum. We wait till it opens.
Yeah, I can't wait. And, when we can see each other again, hopefully we can pick up where we left off, talk about politics. You can come visit the Memorial Museum if you have not done it already. I would love to give you and your husband a tour. So, but thanks for having me on. I love the show.
Thank you very much. And yeah, next time in our shirts, I'll wear this to the museum too.
Perfect.